Our 10th wedding anniversary was supposed to be a milestone. We talked about it for months, maybe a weekend away, maybe just a quiet dinner at the little Italian place where we had our first date. I'd even booked the reservation 2 weeks early, which for me was practically Olympic-level planning. The morning of, she kissed me goodbye on my way to work, said she was excited for tonight, and reminded me not to be late. I wasn't going to be. I'd already left the office early in my head, picturing the two of us at that corner table, the candlelight, the clink of glasses. But around 3 in the afternoon, I got a text, just one line. Something came up at work. Can we celebrate tomorrow? No explanation, no apology beyond the perfunctory sorry. I called her, no answer. Sent a follow-up, no reply. It wasn't the first time she'd had urgent work pop up, but it was the first time it had happened on a night like this. I sat there at my desk, staring at the message, feeling the first small crack in the day I'd been looking forward to for weeks. By 6 o'clock, I was home alone, reheating leftover pasta, trying not to think about the fact that she hadn't even texted me again. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and I told myself maybe she really was still at the office. Maybe she'd walk in any minute, exhausted but apologetic. She didn't. By the time midnight rolled around, I was still at the kitchen table, phone face down, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night everything started to shift. The night I stopped taking her explanations at face value. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. When she walked into the kitchen, hair still damp from a shower, she kissed my cheek and asked if we had any coffee left. Her tone was light, casual, almost too casual, the way you speak when you're skating past something you don't want questioned. I waited for her to offer an explanation. She didn't. Instead, over breakfast, she started talking about needing to pick up a few things for work that day. A busy schedule. I nodded, sipping my coffee, keeping my eyes on the steam rising from the cup instead of her face. The thing about cracks in a relationship is that at first they're small enough to step over. But once you've seen one, you start spotting them everywhere. That week, I noticed her phone was suddenly less available, face down on the table, stuffed into her purse when she left the room. She used to scroll absent-mindedly next to me on the couch. Now she took it into the bedroom under the guise of charging it. Her clothes shifted too, not drastically, but subtly. A sharper cut to her eyeliner, dresses I hadn't seen in months reappearing. She'd always cared about her appearance, but now it felt purposeful, like she was dressing for someone with expectations. On Thursday, I tried an experiment. I texted her mid-afternoon asking if she wanted to grab dinner downtown. Normally, she'd jump at the chance to eat out during the week. This time, she replied, "Can't, late meeting." I replied with a simple, "Okay, where?" She didn't answer for 40 minutes, and when she finally did, it was just, "Conference room, nothing exciting." It wasn't the words that bothered me. It was the gap, the time it took her to respond, as if she needed to construct the right version of reality before she sent it. By Friday, I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for patterns. Missed calls, short texts, changes in schedule that didn't line up with what I knew of her job. The anniversary wasn't the breaking point. It was the moment I started keeping score. And once you start keeping score, you can't stop noticing which side is adding points faster. The following Monday, I decided to stop being a passive observer. Not by kicking the door in or showing up unannounced, but by quietly checking the edges of her story for weak spots. She'd told me she had a late strategy meeting after work, something about quarterly numbers. I asked her a few casual questions about it over breakfast, nothing pushy. Who'd be there, when it might wrap up. She answered without hesitation, but that didn't make me trust the words anymore. That afternoon, instead of going straight home after work,
I drove past her office building around 6:15. The sun was low, turning the glass front into a sheet of gold. Her car wasn't in its usual spot. I circled the lot twice to be sure. Maybe she'd parked somewhere else. Maybe she'd left for dinner with colleagues. But the meeting she described was supposed to be on site, and her boss's car, a bright red BMW, was still parked where it always was. I pulled into a gas station a block away and texted her. "Hope the meeting's not too brutal. Any idea when you'll be done?" Her reply came 3 minutes later. "Still going. Probably another hour." I sat there in my car with the phone in my hand, looking at the office building in my rearview mirror. The lights on the third floor were off. The only people walking out the front doors were strangers in coats, heading toward their cars. By 6:45, I'd seen enough to know she wasn't where she said she was. But I didn't chase it. I didn't drive around searching for her. That would have been sloppy, emotional. Instead, I drove home, made myself a sandwich, and waited for her to walk in. She arrived at 8:15, smiling, a tote bag slung over her shoulder. "Sorry it went so long," she said, dropping her keys into the bowl by the door. I looked up from the TV and said, "No problem. Did you eat?" She shook her head, said she'd grab something later, then disappeared into the shower.
I didn't mention that I'd been by her office. I didn't mention the empty parking spot. This wasn't about catching her off guard in the moment. This was about building a case so airtight she couldn't slip through it. And that night, lying in bed, I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't hoping to be wrong anymore. I was preparing for the day I'd be proven right. If I was going to catch her in a lie, I wanted more than a hunch and a couple of suspicious nights. I wanted something she couldn't dismiss as paranoia. I remembered that about a year ago, she'd asked me to help set up her work email on our shared tablet. It had been a hassle. She'd forgotten her password twice, but eventually it synced. She never used the tablet much, so it sat in the living room mostly untouched. That Tuesday night, after she went to bed early with a headache, I pulled the tablet out from under the coffee table. I hadn't opened it in months, but the email account was still logged in. My pulse kicked up as I scrolled past work memos and scheduling threads, looking for anything that felt out of place. It wasn't instant. There was no neon sign flashing cheating. But there were messages that didn't fit the rest. Short, personal ones from a Gmail account with no name attached, just an initial. No subject lines, times that matched her late meetings. They weren't explicit, but they were intimate in a way that didn't belong in a marriage. Phrases like, "can't wait to see you again," and "last night was worth the risk." Enough to set off alarms in my head. I didn't respond. I didn't forward them. I just took clear photographs of each message with my phone and saved them in a locked folder. The images went to the same cloud backup as everything else I'd been collecting. From there, I added a second layer to my net. Our phone plan had an online account that let me see call and text logs. I didn't have access to her messages themselves. She kept her phone locked, but the patterns told their own story. The same number appearing late at night, almost daily, for weeks. Short calls, long ones, sometimes back-to-back with the emails I just read. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. It was a new presence in her life that had carved out regular space that had once belonged to me. By the time I put the tablet away and shut off the lights, I knew two things for certain. One, this wasn't just bad timing or a misread situation. There was someone else. Two, I wasn't going to confront her until I had something even stronger. Suspicion was the starting point. Now I had confirmation. What I wanted next was finality. The problem with following someone in person is it leaves too much to chance. Traffic, missed turns, being spotted in a reflection, all risks I didn't want to take. I needed a way to see her movements without ever leaving the house. I remembered the keychain I'd given her last Christmas. She thought it was just a sleek leather fob for her car keys. In reality, it was a model that could hold a small AirTag inside.
I hadn't put one in then, it was just the design. But that night, I decided to change that. The next morning, she left her keys on the counter while she was in the shower. I slipped the AirTag into the hidden slot and put them back exactly where I'd found them. No scratches, no fingerprints out of place. That evening, when she said she'd be working late again, I didn't bother with a follow-up text. I just opened the Find My app on my phone and watched the little dot representing her keys leave the office and head in the opposite direction of home. It didn't go far, maybe 10, 12 minutes away, before it stopped in front of a small mid-range hotel tucked off a side street. My stomach tightened, but I didn't move. I didn't need to. The app kept updating every few minutes, showing her right there, not leaving. 2 hours later, the dot moved again, back toward Aum. By the time she walked through the door, she looked freshened up, not disheveled, and carried a takeout bag like she'd just grabbed dinner after work. "Got you something," she said, holding up the bag with a smile. I thanked her, took it, and set it on the counter. She moved through the kitchen, humming under her breath, as if the night had been uneventful. I watched her from the corner of my eye, wondering how many times she'd walked into this house carrying a lie wrapped in paper bags and small talk. Later that night, I saved the AirTag location history to my phone, screenshots lined up neatly alongside the emails and call logs. The story was no longer guesswork. It had dates, times, and coordinates. The next step wasn't about finding more. It was about deciding when to bring it all into the light and making sure I did it on my terms. Once I had the AirTag location history, there was no more maybe left in my mind. It wasn't just one visit. Over the next week, I watched the same pattern repeat twice: office to hotel, hotel to home, with the same careful timing, the same neat packaging of the evening in a way that could pass for ordinary. But I didn't rush it. Confrontations born out of anger are messy. I wanted precision. I started by choosing the date, a Friday evening, 2 weeks out. That gave me enough time to get everything in order. The printed screenshots of the AirTag history, the photographs of the emails, the call log records. Each piece labeled and dated, organized into a single binder that looked more like a business presentation than a personal disaster. The binder wasn't just for effect, it was for me. It meant that when she tried to dodge or deflect, I could calmly flip to the exact page, the exact timestamp, and let the facts do the talking. Then came the question of where. I didn't want to do it at home. Too many escape routes, she could storm off to the bedroom, slam the bathroom door, retreat into silence. I needed a place where she'd be forced to sit and face it, where leaving mid-conversation would be obvious, even humiliating. I booked the small private room at an upscale restaurant under the pretense of a belated anniversary dinner, the kind of setting where voices stay low, where the table is too wide for casual touch, where every sound carries.
In the days leading up to it, I acted normal. Not fake cheerful, not withdrawn, just steady. I didn't bring up her schedule, I didn't question her late nights. I let her think the game was still hers to play. At the same time, I took quiet steps to protect myself. I moved a few more personal items to a safe location. I had my paycheck direct deposited into a new account in my name only. I changed the passwords to my email and cloud storage. The night before, I went through the binder one last time, running my hand over the smooth cover. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, more like readiness. She had her lies, polished and rehearsed. I had the truth, laid out in black and white. Tomorrow, one of them would survive the night. We arrived at the restaurant just after 7. It was one of those quiet, low-lit places with heavy wood paneling and soft music in the background, the kind of atmosphere that makes even uncomfortable conversations feel contained. The hostess led us to a small room off to the side, just a single table with 2 high-backed chairs, separated from the main dining area by a frosted glass partition. She smiled as she sat down, smoothing her dress. "This is nice," she said, glancing around. "You didn't have to do all this."
I returned the smile, though it felt thin on my face. I wanted it to be special, I said. We ordered drinks. She made small talk about work, about a new project her team was starting, about the weather turning cooler. I let her talk. The binder sat at my feet, resting against the chair leg like an extra guest at the table. When the drinks arrived, I didn't touch mine. I reached down, lifted the binder onto the table, and slid it in front of me. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to my face, a question forming in her expression. "What's that?" she asked. I opened it to the first page, a printed screenshot of the AirTag location map from the night of our missed anniversary. The little blue dot was clearly marked at the hotel. Date, time, duration, all neatly labeled. She frowned, leaning forward slightly. "What is this supposed to be?" "Evidence," I said quietly, "from the last 2 months. Every time you said you were working late, and every time your keys were at that hotel instead of your office." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I flipped to the next page, another date, another blue dot. Then the next. The email screenshots, the call logs. Each page a step she'd taken away from the truth. "This is insane," she said finally, her voice sharper now. "You're spying on me." "I'm documenting you," I corrected. "There's a difference. And I wouldn't have to if you weren't lying about where you were and who you were with." She sat back, arms crossed, the kind of defensive posture that says attack mode. "You've clearly made up your mind. So what's the point of this little presentation?" "The point," I said, keeping my tone level, "is that I wanted to give you the courtesy of seeing exactly what I know before I make my next move. No surprises, no questions, just clarity." The room was quiet, except for the faint clink of glasses from the dining area beyond the partition. She glanced at the binder again, her jaw tight. "You've been planning this," she said after a long pause. "For how long?" "Since the night you skipped our anniversary for a meeting." I didn't blink when I said it. "That was the night I stopped believing your version of our life." For the first time that evening, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not guilt, but the realization that the control she'd been holding so tightly had just slipped out of her hands. I closed the binder and slid it back to my side of the table. "We can eat if you want," I said, "but we both know this dinner isn't about the food." She didn't answer, and in that silence, I knew the rest of the night would be about endings, not celebrations. The server arrived just then with our appetizers, 2 plates of something delicate and overpriced. She set them down gently, smiled, and disappeared, unaware she'd walked into the middle of a war being fought in whispers. My wife picked up her fork, but didn't take a bite. "You've clearly been keeping score," she said finally. "Do you know how unhealthy that is, to track someone like this?" "It's not unhealthy to verify what your partner is telling you," I replied evenly, "especially when what they're telling you doesn't match reality." She shook her head, like I was missing some obvious truth. "You don't understand. Work has been—" "Don't," I said, my voice low but firm. "Don't use work as a shield. I know your office, I know your boss, I know the schedule. And I know that 2 nights last week you were at that hotel from 6:30 until just before 9. Her eyes narrowed. "So what are you accusing me of exactly? Having an affair? Because if that's what you think, maybe you should say it out loud instead of hiding behind maps and call logs." "I'm not accusing," I said. "I'm confirming." I flipped the binder back open to the email screenshots, turning it towards her. She glanced down, her face unreadable. "You have no idea what these mean," she said finally. "They could be from anyone." "They're from the same email account that shows up in your work inbox," I said. "The one that doesn't have a name attached. The same account that sends you messages late at night saying they can't wait to see you again. The same account you reply to within minutes." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She reached for her wine glass, took a sip,
and set it down with more force than necessary. "You've built this entire narrative," she said, "because you're insecure, because you can't stand the idea that my life exists outside of you." I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. "You're confusing insecurity with clarity. Insecurity is wondering if something's wrong and doubting yourself. Clarity is having the evidence in your hand and knowing you're not crazy." We stared at each other across the table. The candle between us flickered, casting shifting shadows on her face. "You've already decided I'm guilty," she said. "So what now? You serve me papers? You walk out? What's the grand finale here?" "That depends on you," I said. "If you want to have an honest conversation tonight, we can. If you want to keep lying, then yes, I'll walk out, and the next time we speak will be through lawyers." She looked down at her untouched plate, then back at me. For the first time that evening, her confidence faltered. Her shoulders dipped slightly. Her eyes darted to the binder again. She knew there was no gap to slip through. Whatever she said next, it wouldn't be to convince me. It would be to salvage what little ground she had left. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached for her napkin, folding and unfolding it like it was the only thing keeping her hands busy. When she finally looked at me, her eyes had lost that sharp, combative edge. "It's not what you think," she said. Her voice was softer now, almost measured. I held her gaze. "Then explain it to me. What exactly have I been looking at for the last month?" She hesitated, glancing toward the frosted glass partition as if to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. "He's a friend, someone I met through a client. We talk, we sometimes meet, but it's not—" "Not what?" I cut in. "Not physical? Not romantic? Not inappropriate?" She flinched slightly. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," I said. "You're married. Complication doesn't belong in this equation." Her lips tightened. "You've been distant for a while," she said, suddenly, as if throwing a dart in the dark. "And sometimes I just needed someone to talk to. Someone who made me feel—" "Spare me the half-truths," I interrupted. "Needing someone to talk to doesn't lead to 2-hour visits at a hotel. That's not conversation. That's deliberate, planned, and repeated." She exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. "I never meant for it to become a thing," she said. "It started innocent. Then it escalated." There it was. Not a full confession, but enough. Enough to confirm every screenshot, every GPS ping, every quiet suspicion I'd cataloged in the binder. "So you're telling me," I said carefully, "that you met someone, kept it from me, built a separate part of your life around him, and lied every time you left the house to be with him?" She didn't answer. The silence between us stretched, heavy and unbroken. I let it sit there, let it force her to feel the weight of it. "I could have confronted you the first time I saw your car wasn't at the office," I said finally, "but I wanted to give you the chance to tell me the truth on your own. You didn't. You doubled down, and now here we are." Her shoulders sank. She looked down at her plate, her fork idly tracing the edge without ever touching the food. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said. "I don't want you to say anything," I said. "I want you to understand that this is the point where everything changes. The marriage you had before you walked into this room doesn't exist anymore." Her head lifted, eyes locking with mine again, but now there was no fight in them, only the faint realization that she'd already lost. The air in the room felt thicker now, heavy with all the things she hadn't said and all the things she had. She finally reached for her fork, stabbed at a piece of food, but didn't eat it. It was just something to do with her hands. "I can fix this," she said suddenly, like the thought had just occurred to her. "We can fix this, we can go to counseling, we can—" I shook my head slowly. "We can't fix something you've been actively breaking for months. This wasn't one mistake. This was a decision you made, over and over, each time you walked out the door." Her eyes darted to the binder again,
as if it might vanish if she looked hard enough. "It didn't mean I didn't love you," she said. "I just got lost." "That's the thing," I said. "You didn't get lost. You took a detour you wanted to take. You knew exactly where you were going every time, and it wasn't home." Her lip trembled, the first real crack in her composure. "You're just going to throw everything away?" "You threw it first," I said quietly. "I'm just refusing to pick it back up." The server returned then, asking if everything was all right, her eyes flicking between us as if she could feel the tension. I told her we were fine and asked for the check. My wife said nothing. When the bill came, I paid it without hesitation. As I slid my card back into my wallet, I knew it would be the last dinner I ever bought for her.
We stood. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back just enough for the contact to miss. That small space between us felt wider than the table we'd been sitting at all night. Walking out of the restaurant, I could feel her eyes on me, searching for some sign that this was just a bad fight, that we'd get in the car and start over tomorrow. But I didn't give her anything. In the parking lot, I turned to her. "When you get home tonight, I won't be there," I said. "I've already moved what I need. The rest, you can keep." Her breath caught. "You're serious?" "I've been serious since the night you lied about working late on our anniversary," I said. "The only difference is that now you know it." I didn't wait for her to reply. I just walked to my car, unlocked it, and got in. She stood there for a moment, then slowly made her way to her own. As I pulled out of the lot, I felt the weight shift. Not lift, not yet, but shift, like a boulder that had finally been dislodged. It would take time to roll it the rest of the way out of my life, but the hard part was done. I wasn't chasing her lies anymore. I wasn't in the dark. I'd drawn the line, and I'd walked away. And there was no part of me that wanted to look back. I didn't drive straight to where I was staying. Instead, I took the long way, the kind of meandering route you take when you're not ready to be in a room alone with your thoughts yet. City lights blurred past the windshield, my hands steady on the wheel, even as my mind kept replaying her face at the restaurant. Not shocked, not blindsided, but cornered. My phone buzzed 3 times in the first 15 minutes. I ignored it. When I finally glanced at the screen, at a red light, the messages were all from her. "Where are you? Please, let's talk. You can't just leave like this." Each one came quicker than the last, but none of them said "I'm sorry." Not once. By the time I reached the small, furnished apartment I'd arranged through a friend, the calls had started. I let them go to voicemail. I wasn't interested in hearing a frantic, half-scripted attempt to rewrite the night we'd just had. The apartment was bare, but clean. A couch, a bed, a table. The kind of place you could leave at a moment's notice. I set my bag down in the corner and stood for a moment, taking in the quiet. No hum of her TV shows in the background. No faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. Just stillness. I made coffee even though it was late, just to have something warm in my hands. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "We can work this out. I swear it wasn't what you think." I didn't reply. I put the phone face down on the table, sat on the couch, and let the reality sink in. I wasn't going back. I'd imagined this moment dozens of times in the past few weeks. What it would feel like to walk away, to have the evidence and the final word. I thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff after you've already jumped, realizing you can't climb back up. But it was still better than where I'd been, living in the constant hum of doubt, playing the part of a man who believed his wife. That night, I slept in a bed that wasn't mine, in a place that didn't feel like home. But for the first time in months, I didn't have to wonder who she was texting, where she was, or whether her smile was meant for someone else. It wasn't peace yet, but it was quiet. And quiet was a start. The morning after felt different. Not lighter exactly, more like the air was clearer. The way it feels after a long storm finally passes. I made coffee, sat at the little table in the apartment, and read through the binder one last time. Not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted to feel certain about the choice I was about to make. The messages from her kept coming through the night. Some pleading, some angry, some pretending nothing had happened. It was a carousel of emotions, all spinning around the same center. She still hadn't admitted the whole truth. By noon, I'd sent one text back. It was the only one I planned to send. "We're done. I'll have my lawyer contact you next week. Please don't come to the apartment." I didn't wait for a reply. I slid the phone across the table, picked up my coffee, and sat in the stillness. There was no satisfaction in the message, just the calm of finality. Over the next few days, I started the quiet work of dismantling the life we'd built. Bank accounts, joint subscriptions, the lease. I packed my personal things from the house during the hours I knew she'd be gone. I left the rest. Friends asked what had happened. I didn't give details. Not because I was protecting her. She'd made her choices. But because I didn't want my life reduced to gossip. It wasn't working, I said. I couldn't trust her. That was enough. At night, I'd sit by the apartment window, watching the city lights, thinking about how small the signs had seemed at first, how easy it had been to explain them away. If there was a lesson in all of it, it was this. The truth doesn't hide forever. It leaves a trail, sometimes a small one, sometimes a bright neon path. And the only question is whether you're willing to follow it. I'd spent months hoping I was wrong, hoping there was a simple explanation that would make me feel foolish for doubting her. But the truth didn't care about my feelings. It was there, all along, waiting for me to stop looking away. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger takes energy, and I needed mine for something else, rebuilding. The version of me that accepted half answers and vague excuses was gone. What came next would be slower, quieter, but honest. If someone asked me now what to do when suspicion creeps in, I'd tell them this. Don't let love make you blind. Don't let history convince you that the present can't change. And if the person you're with forces you to become a detective just to feel secure, they're not your partner. They're your suspect. I closed the binder for the last time and slid it into the bottom drawer of the apartment desk. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I wanted to remember, not the details, but the feeling of knowing exactly where I stood. It was the last page of that story, and I was ready to start writing another one.